So the title is The Evolution of Incretin Hormones. It has two parts, from scientific discovery to its therapeutic use. We will journey the story of incretin hormones on how it was discovered and all the way to the therapeutic use, which revolutionized and impacted the management of diabetes. In short, from bench to bedside. It is a fascinating story of scientific advancement, but we don't end there. We will have the second part, which is the new look of GLP-1 and the future of this class of agent, which will be presented on the next presentation. This is my disclosure. Okay, so what is the general objective of this workshop or presentation? Number one, we look into the historical background, briefly revisit the discovery and evolution of GLP-1 RAs, highlighting their significance in diabetes and obesity management. Number two, we look into the current therapeutic landscape, review the mechanism, clinical implication, and impact of existing GLP-1 RAs, including their benefits and limitations. Number three, innovation of GLP-1 therapy. We explore the GLP-1 polyagonists, discussing their design, potential advantages, and how they represent an evolution of GLP-1 based treatment. And number four, what's the future direction? We will discuss the ongoing research, the emerging data, and the anticipated role of GLP-1 polyagonists and other innovation in improving patient outcomes. And number five, clinical and practical implication. We will address on how these developments might influence treatment strategies, patient care, and broader therapeutic landscape for metabolic diseases. As I'm going to outline the first part, first we're gonna define incretin and what is the origin of incretin concept. And then the discovery of these two important hormones and their historical milestone or background. And then what is the mode of action in understanding the incretin hormones and the development of the incretin-based therapies. And we look into the cardiovascular outcome as well as safety. And the last but not the least is the future of incretin or GLP-1 therapy. Included here is the expanded use of various therapeutic areas beyond type 2 DM, the new formulation GLP-1 polyagonist, and the advancement in the technologies such as oral and the non-peptide oral GLP-1 RA. Now, to introduce the anti-diabetic medication, let's compare the development of marketed availability of anti-hypertensive drugs with anti-diabetic drugs. Over several decades, starting from 1950s, we have seen a steady increase in the new anti-hypertensive agent introduced in the market. As compared to the medicine for diabetes, from 1950s to before the turn of the century, we have only a handful of agents. Basically, insulin, sulfonylureas, and biguanide, and maybe alpha-glucosidase inhibitor or TCDs. After which we have exponential new agent in the market that had caught up with the anti-hypertensive drugs, although some of these agents are only available in the US and not available in other countries. In 2015, a new class of agent, SGLT2 inhibitor, were the most recent addition to this group and have been shown promising results in terms of efficacy and cardiorenal protection. At that time of their introduction, they were often referred to as a new kids on the block. Now, the broken line with biguanides is the issue on metformin that was removed eventually from the market because of several episodes of lactic acidosis. Okay, so it's been a while before they introduced metformin in the market. Okay, so apart from the SGLT2 inhibitor, incretin-based drugs, particularly GLP-1 receptor agonists, have emerged as the leading class of medication in terms of development because of the multiple metabolic benefits, as we can see later. So Let's start with the incretin concept. The role of gastrointestinal tract as an endocrine gland has been recognized since the beginning of the 20th century. The first hormone that was discovered in 1902 called secretin by Bayliss and Starkey. An animal study in where they introduced acid and dilute hydrochloric acid mixed with partially digested food into the duodenum of a hog, in which pancreatic duct was denervated but with the intact pancreatic circulation. Now it activated a substance coming from the duodenum and called it secretin, which in turn released into the circulation and comes into contact with the pancreas, where it stimulates secretions of digestive juice into the intestine to pancreatic duct. But what exactly the meaning of the word incretin? And the answer is incretin hormones are released from the gastrointestinal tract in response to nutrient ingestion that enhance glucose-dependent insulin secretion from the pancreas and aid in the overall maintenance of glucose homeostasis. And who coined the word incretin? It was in 1932 by a Belgian physiologist named Jean Labère. Most likely, incretin came from three words: intestine, secretion, and insulin. So, this is the historical milestone of incretin hormones. The gut as an endocrine gland was first recognized since the beginning of the 20th century. Like I said, secretin was the first identified peptide hormone from the intestine which stimulate production of bicarbonate from the pancreas. About 30 years later, experiment in dogs shows hypoglycemic effect of intestinal extract. Thus, incretin effect was started to be defined, which is a substance from the intestine that produce hypoglycemia. It was in 1960s, incretin concept was confirmed in the laboratory following the development of an accurate insulin assay called bradioimmunoassay by Yellow and Burson. Since then, incretin has been the source of intense scientific investigation. Later part of 1960s, investigator named the connection between the intestine and the pancreas to be the enteroinsular axis. Since then, search for the incretin hormones has begun. In 1970, the first incretin hormones was identified as GIP, glucose-dependent insulotropic peptide, but the antibodies neutralizing the effect of GIP does not totally abolish the incretin effect. So GIP action could not account for the full incretin effect. Thus, investigators thought that there must be another incretin hormone. And true enough, in 1980s, the second incretin hormone was identified as GLP-1 following the cloning of mammalian DNA and discovery of pro-glucagon gene that encodes for GLP-1. In 1990s, receptor for incretin hormones, GIP as well as GLP-1, was cloned and identified to be a G protein-coupled receptor that works on a cyclic AMP signaling pathway similar to glucagon. This identification have given us most of the physiologic effect of incretin, especially GLP-1. Late in 1990s to early 2000, there were robust data to show that native GLP-1 were beneficial for type 2 diabetes, so that in 2005, exenatide, the first incretin mimetic, was approved by US FDA. Then incretin enhancer was approved for use in in 2006. So there you are, the historical milestone of incretin hormone. One slide says it all, from incretin concept to discovery of the most important incretin hormone, GLP-1, to its drug development, eventually to the market. Now, this is the summary of GLP-1 RAs approved for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And the timeline was based on the US FDA Food and Drug Administration, which may not be the same time that we have locally. Now, moreover, let's not overlook the much anticipated local approval of the incretin, which has been available in the US since 2022. Now, before the discovery of important incretin hormones, the concept of incretin was first introduced in the early 20th century, meaning the concept came first before the discovery of incretin hormone itself. This is a schematic diagram. The figure may not be perfectly accurate. This is an experiment looking at the same amount of glucose introduced through IV versus oral. The researcher observed that the oral glucose concentration led to the greater insulin response than the intravenous glucose. This suggested the existence of gut-derived factors that enhance insulin secretion, which were later termed incretins. So let us now talk on enteroinsular axis. In 1969, on your left, Unger and Essentroth named the connection between the gut and the pancreas islets to be the enteroinsular axis. On your right, Creutzfeldt later suggested that this axis encompasses a nutrient, neural, hormonal signals from the gut to the islet cells, affecting the secretion of insulin, glucagon, somatostatin, as well as pancreatic polypeptide. Another important thing is the gene that encodes GLP-1, the pro-glucagon gene, and with the post-translational processing with specific enzymes. This gene encodes for pro-glucagon peptide, a long peptide chain, a large sequence of peptide, and through this post-translational processing, this large peptide is processed into a smaller peptide by prohormone convertase. There are two types of prohormone convertase in the different tissues or organs. Now, this is the similarities and difference of GIP and GLP-1. Individually, when you look at the effect of GLP-1 in glucagon secretion, it reduces. Contrarily, when you look at the effect of GIP on the glucagon secretion, it increases. While on the appetite, food intake, body weight, vagal activity, gastric MTM, and others, you see that GLP-1 seems to have a beneficial in terms of glucose control and weight loss. And there's no effect on GIP. Moreover, when you look at the effect on adipose tissue, GIP has a negative effect, while GLP-1 has no effect. That is why GIP received little attention as a pharmacologic target for type 2 diabetes. The physiologic effect of GLP-1 is multifaceted, primarily influencing number one is glucose homeostasis because it stimulates insulin secretion and inhibits glucagon secretion in a glucose-dependent manner. It also regulates appetite and satiety. It also inhibits gastric emptying, which are the key physiologic effects in maintaining glucose homeostasis. More recently, our knowledge of benefit of GLP-1 has expanded. We have the cardiovascular effect, neuroprotective effect, the effect on various organs like the kidney, in coagulation, liver, even in intraepithelial lymphocytes, which have an overall effect on a decreased inflammation, and the brain, not only as a modulate aversion response, reduce appetite, but some studies have shown neuroprotective effects. So what's the problem of incretin effect with type 2 diabetes? Now, when we look at these slides, on your left, they did an oral isocaloric glucose challenge through oral and IV glucose. And this is in non-type 2 DM, which serve as a control. And you see that the insulin response is much higher compared to the IV glucose. Okay. Now, when we look at the type 2 DAM, they did the same experiment, and you see that the incretin effect is defective or reduced or obtunded. Okay. And this is not only in the overt diabetes. This is a normal glucose tolerance, and this is IGT, and this is overt diabetes. So, it is not only in the overt diabetes that incretin effect is reduced, but it is also seen in IGT as well as type 2 DM. So this is the proof of concept that GLP-1 works with type 2 DM. So a native GLP-1, as like I said, has a very short half-life, and if you want to see the glucose benefit, you have to infuse it continuously through an IV infusion. So this is a proof of concept. They have two groups of patients, one given saline and the other one given a native GLP-1. And they give GLP-1 infusion, and they measure glucose, insulin, and glucagon. And over time, you see that the glucose in DM patient, glucose concentrations have come down, and insulin secretion had gone up, and glucagon secretions have reduced. What is significant here is that as the blood glucose of type 2 DM patient with GLP-1 infusion comes near normal, the insulotropic effect as well as the gluconostatic effect is stopped. Okay, so it's glucose dependent. So meaning to say, it doesn't cause severe hypoglycemia. So the glucose-dependent insulotropic peptide, GIP and GLP-1, has its own chromosomes, and it has its own genes, and it encodes a pre-pro-GIP, which has a 153 amino acid, and through post-translational, you have 42 amino acids for GIP, while in the GLP-1, you have pro-glucagon of 160 amino acid, and GLP-1 after post-translational cleavage, you have a 31 amino acids. Okay? So the glucose lowering effect of GIP alone have not been particularly impressive, which is why the development as a drug has lagged behind. However, recent findings shows that combining GIP and GLP-1 changes the outcome significantly due to their synergistic effect. The synergy is the key when we consider coagonists, and we will have more on this later when we go to the polyagonist presentation. So one hurdle or barrier in the development of incretin hormone is the DPP-4 enzyme. Now, DPP-4 enzymes is ubiquitously present in the body. It can be present in many cells and also in a soluble form in the circulation. And if you look at the newly secreted GIP as well as GLP-1, you have the DPP-4 that is present anywhere, and it immediately cleave or degrade the active GIP and GLP-1 to an inactive form, so that the GIP as well as GLP has a very short half-life. For GIP, the half-life is 4 to 5 minutes, and GLP-1 is 2 to 3 minutes. Now, the native GLP-1 has two biologic active isoforms, the GLP-1 736 amide and 737 amide. Now, after post-translational, you have a GLP-1 137 and 136. This is the extended full length of N-terminal form, and this is devoid of biological activity. So it has to remove the first 6 amino acids to be active. So the shorter version of GLP-1 molecules has substantial enhanced biological activity. On the lower panel, you can see the native GLP-1 has a very short half-life, as I already mentioned, and you can see all the peptide sequence of GIP, GLP-1, the two forms, 737, 736, as well as GLP-2. And these are native. And you can see that the second amino acid in the N-terminal is alanine, which is vulnerable to the cleavage of DPP-4. Well, the exendin 4 is not a native GLP-1, and it is resistant because the second amino acid contains glycine and not amino acid, and not alanine. So, the major problem using GLP-1 or native GLP-1 in outpatient situation, you need to give it through infusion because, as I mentioned, it has a very short half-life. This is the first GLP-1 study in type 2 DM published in 2002, compared to control 8 hours measurement of plasma glucose. And the upper portion, type 2 DM just received a placebo, a saline, okay, over 6 weeks, and the lower panel was assigned to GLP-1 infusion. And you can see the significant lowering of concentration of glucose in the plasma over a 8 weeks period compared to placebo. So what's the therapeutic strategies of incretin based? There are two. You have the GLP-1 RA, which is a peptide. They're analog. Their structure is similar to GLP-1. Ability to bind to and activate the GLP-1 receptor. It has improved pharmacokinetic property because it is resistant to the degradation of DPP-4 enzymes. An example is Exendin-4 base and GLP-1 analog. On the other hand, DPP-4 inhibitors and molecules that inhibit that degrade the GLP-1. So the inhibition of enzyme protease activity of DPP-4 that prevent degradation and inactivation of both GIP and GLP-1 and make use of this therapeutic potential of the endogenous GLP-1 as well as GIP. And the example of the drugs under this are as follows. Okay, so remember this guy, the Gila monster, scientific name Heloderma suspectum. Now, Gila monster only eats 3 or 4 times a year, and the compound produced in its salivary gland called Exendin-4 may help them digest a very huge meal and very slowly digest it over or absorb it over time. Now, Exendin-4 was uncovered in 1990s by endocrinologist by Dr. John Eng at the Veterans Administration Center in Bronx, New York. Now, Exendin-4 came from the Gila monster, and since we cannot procure a lot of Exendin-4 for mass production, so exenatide is a synthetic version of this peptide. So, when we look at the structures of GLP-1, native GLP-1, and Exendin-4, the amino acid sequence, and you can see that Exendin-4 is resistant to cleavage of DPP-4. And why is this so? And this is because the second amino acid is not alanine. Remember that DPP-4 degrades the small peptides with a second amino acid in an N-terminus, either alanine or glycine. And Exendin-4 contain, or rather alanine and proline. And Exendin-4 contain glycine instead of alanine and proline. So Exendin-4 is resistant to DPP-4 enzymes cleavage. So, it is customary to divide GLP-1 agonists into molecular backbone. One is human GLP-1 and another one Exendin-4. The example of human GLP-1 is dulaglutide, liraglutide, and semaglutide. For Exendin-4, the exenatide, lexisinitide, as well as epiglinetide. And you see this is the list of current GLP-1 and its analog. Again, it is divided into human GLP-1 backbone and Exendin-4 backbone. And you can see the FDA approval here, the description, administration, and half-life. Okay, and the human GLP-1 backbone has a surname glutide. Okay, and the Exendin-4 backbone has a surname of natide. Now, this is the structure and molecular mass of native GLP-1. Compared it with the approved and emerging GLP-1 RA. So the question is why some of these molecules can be given once weekly. Now, there are several mechanisms. The molecule, number one, can be either incorporate, they incorporate the molecule with a polymer to slowly absorb from the subcutaneous to the circulation. Example of this is exenatides once weekly. Or by mixing a molecule with an albumin externally before subcutaneous injection. An example of this is abiglutide. Or attaching a covalently with fatty acyl molecules to the molecules that will attach to the serum albumin and increases the half-life. And finally, combining with the FC portion of IgG, and this will reduce lysosomal degradation and can be recycled back to the surface of the cell that prolongs the half-life. There are short-acting, there are long-acting, and short-acting initially for mostly for the exenatide or exendin based, like exenatide twice daily and lexisinatide once daily. However, there is a drug under exendin 4, epiglinetide, that can be given once weekly or even once monthly. And this is because they fuse it with FC portion of IgG. Now, semaglutide is also co-formulated with sodium N aminocaprylate or SNAC, which is an oral semaglutide, which somehow shield the molecule from enzymatic and acidic degradation and then accelerate its site-directed release and absorption in the stomach. Okay, this is a timeline of drug approval by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And you can see for both diabetes and for as an anti-obesity. Now, Bydureon Besides was approved by FDA for use in pediatric type 2 DM patient aged 10 years and older in 2021, and also FDA approved once weekly semaglutide for adolescent and obesity in 2023. And this is the optical appearance and properties of pen injection devices for approved GLP-1 receptor agonists. And you may be interested, there are different devices. And we also have on the right is the fixed ratio combination with basal insulin. Now, these are on the way on how to up-titrate or the titration schedule for individual GLP-1 RAs. Normally, you start low and titrate slowly to maximal tolerated dose. And this is to avoid or to mitigate the GI side effects. Now, the mechanism of action of incretin therapies, the two incretin-based drugs. When you use DPP-4 inhibitors, you increase the physiologic GLP-1 level. So your effect is mostly on the pancreas, which reduces plasma glucose. No much effect on the stomach, brain, and intestine. While if you give GLP-1 receptor agonists, you give a huge dose, we call it pharmacological dose, and the level of GLP-1 can reach the stomach, brain, and intestine. That's why it can give you decreased gastric emptying, you can reduce appetite and improve satiety, and can give you side effects like nausea and vomiting. Now, recent development incretin-based therapies, the DPP-4 inhibitor once weekly, okay, Trelagliptin by Takeda, this is given once weekly, and Omarigliptin by MK or MSD. These are once weekly DPP-4 that are currently available in Japan. Recent development in incretin-based also, we have the GLP-1 RA agonist, oral peptide. We have it already in some countries, the oral semaglutide. But what is interesting is a small molecules non-peptide oral GLP-1 agonist in the development. Pfizer has it and Lilly has it too. Now, this slide will show you the comparison of peptide and small molecule GLP-1 receptor agonists in terms of oral bioavailability. When you look at the semaglutide oral, you have 0.4 to 1% oral bioavailability. In one of the small molecules, it can reach up to 21 to 28% bioavailability. Okay. So, it improves efficiency, without any restriction to food and fasting, and it may improve bioavailability much better. Because when you look at the oral peptide GLP-1, you have some restriction. You have minimum interval of 30 minutes between drug intake and subsequent meal, and you just have to take the pills with a small amount of fluid. That's about 4 ounces of fluid only. Well, if you use an oral small non-peptide GLP-1 RA, this restriction is avoided. No interval between drug intake and meal necessary. So here is the GLP-1 cardiovascular outcome trial timeline. Okay, from the early 2015, we have the Elixa with the lexisinotide, down to the early 2019 with Harmony, albiglutide, and there will be more as they finish their CVOT or cardiovascular outcome trials. Okay, so with the meta-analysis with GLP-1 cardiovascular outcome in diabetes, when we look at primary prevention, high CVD risk, when you look at the recruitment of patients with all the different CVOT trials with GLP-1, it is only the REWIND trial with the use dulaglutide has recruited more multiple risk factors than established cardiovascular, and the results shows impressive benefit on primary prevention. But overall, when you look at the meta-analysis, overall GLP-1 RA COBT shows cardiovascular benefit. That's why the new recommendation for ADA-EASD, that if you have established or multiple risk, you can use these medications, or if you heart failure, you can use SGLT2, etc. And these are being incorporated in the algorithm recommendation, are based on the CVOT or based on available data. So that in the cardiovascular disease and risk management, the ADA 2023 baseline is lifestyle modification, diabetes education. Okay, there are 4 pillars in the reduction in diabetes complication. One is glycemic management, blood pressure, lipid management, and of course, the agent with cardiovascular and kidney benefit. So, let's look on the safety profile of GLP-1 receptor. Again, pancreatitis and pancreatic cancer, a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trial or RCT did not find any significant increase in the risk of pancreatitis among users of GLP-1 RA compared to control group. How about thyroid tumors, especially medullary thyroid cancer? These are more common in rodents than in humans. Okay. Nevertheless, it is contraindicated with familiar history of men too. Cholelithiasis, the impact of GLP-1 on the risk of gallstone. Cholelithiasis, the evidence is not definitive, although type 2 diabetes is also predisposed to gallstone. Okay. Diabetic retinopathy complication more recently have been reported, perhaps due to the rapid improvement in blood glucose control. So advise patient to undergo appropriate guideline recommended eye examination before starting therapy if not done within the last 12 months. And again, these are new again, suicidal ideation. Lately, US FDA initial review shows no clear link. European Union regulator ruled out the link. Okay, this is a Scandinavian cohort study on risk of thyroid cancer with the GLP-1 RA, Scandinavian countries like Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. The conclusion is that in this large cohort study using nationwide data from these 3 countries, GLP-1 RA was not associated with substantial increased risk of thyroid cancer. So just to give you the proof, the FDA initial review shows no clear link between GLP-1 and suicidal ideation. and the European counterpart says there's no link between weight loss and weight loss drug with suicidal thoughts. So these are the dose adjustment for an EGFR less than 45. These are information presented that reflect in each of their package insert rather than guidance from this consensus report. As you can see that for exendin 4 based GLP-1, it's more restrictive because in exenatide it's not recommended to give it in stage 4, as well as in lexisinitide it's not recommended to give it in stage 5. While all other GLP-1 including tirzepatide, the incretin, it can be given with no dose adjustment required in all stages of CKD. So in terms of retentions of gastric content before anesthesia with GLP-1RA, because here at least 2 reported studies, so the studies are needed, more studies are needed to evaluate the optimal safe duration of holding GLP-1RA preoperatively. Until such data becomes available, additional approaches to reduce the risk of perioperative aspiration can be considered. But lately, at least for patients receiving weekly GLP-1, the recommendation is to stop GLP-1RA 1 week before the surgery or procedure. So that's why in the latest erratum of ADA, it says there that the revised content for clinical consideration for GLP-1RA now reads, counsel patient about potential for ill use. So recommendation to minimize the occurrence of severe GI adverse effect are the following. Improve eating habit. Eat slowly. Eat only if you are hungry. Eat smaller portion. Avoid lying down after having a meal. Stop eating in case of feeling of fullness, and pay attention to the impact of certain food. So where are we today, and where have we come from, and what is in front of us, meaning the future? So initially on your left, from discovery of incretin hormones, we explored it as a therapeutic strategy that had helped a lot of our type 2 DM patient, more on the glycemic control. Now on your right, we have explored and unraveled many clinical benefits that may not be related to just glycemic control alone or the extra glycemic effect. Now we have a lot of opportunity with incretin-based therapies. It's been shown in some studies that it improved obesity and its related comorbidities. Besides improving glycemic control, it protects the heart and kidney, substantial and sustained weight loss with anti-obesity dose of GLP-1RA. If you improve the weight of the patient, you may improve obstructive sleep apnea, even dementia, eye diseases, and fatty liver or steatotic liver disease. Okay, so for future development, we can already see the present indication for type 1 diabetes and obesity. For future development and possible under investigation, type 1 diabetes, prediabetes, fatty liver, PCOS, and the future for brain protection, coronary heart disease, and even psoriasis. For future combination therapy with gut-derived hormones, which we will tackle in the next presentation as a second part, and the advancements of delivery system such as oral tablet, for example, osmotic mini pump, or even possible as inhaled GLP-1. So, the established and emerging evidence supporting use of GLP-1 medicine. The right panel, the clinical indication where use of GLP-1 medicine is now supported by extensive clinical trial data. The left panel, the potential indication, still under study with ongoing phase 3 trials. The center panel, the classical indication, encompasses type 2 DM and obesity as well as cardiorenal indication where the benefit of GLP-1 medicine are supported by multiple clinical trials, cardiovascular, diabetic kidney disease, peripheral artery disease, you name it. So, therefore, the future direction not only provides a hopeful outlook on the advancement in incretin-based therapy, but also underscore the importance of continued research and innovation in this field. This surely will increase the potential of incretin hormones and revolutionize the therapeutic landscape for diabetes and other metabolic disorders. The next portion of the presentation is the emerging frontiers in diabetes management, the role of GLP-1 co-agonists, expanding the incretin universe. And thank you for listening.